We are moving along to our next guest. Veteran news anchor Campbell Brown is co-founder and CEO of Forum AI, a venture she just recently launched and will tell us all about. Come on up. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, good to be here. Hi, everyone.
Okay, so I think the obvious question is just what is Forum AI and what drove you to launch it?
Yeah, I've had a strange career, but I think it all makes sense to where it's led me. I've spent most of my career trying to get information right. I was an anchor for CNN and NBC before that, and then I ran news at Facebook, now Meta. And now I'm focused on what this means in an AI world. And it was 3-something years ago when ChatGPT was released, and I remember at that moment realizing this is going to be the door through which information is going to flow in the future. And it's not great at the information that it's delivering today. And then I watch my kids, I have 2 teenagers, adopt the technology immediately and begin using ChatGPT for everything, every question they had, never checking the sources. And sometimes the answers were good, sometimes they were biased, sometimes they were just confidently wrong. And trying to figure out how we improve the quality of that information if this really is going to be the funnel through which information flows, and that's whether you use Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT or any of these tools, they are deciding the sources of information that you will get. They're synthesizing that information. And in my view, they have to do a much better job of it.
So explain how you go about doing this at Forum.
Yeah, so what we have done, and I think it's important to first understand the challenge that these large language models have today, which is access to every piece of information on the internet, but they have a very hard time finding signal in the noise. So it's identifying what is credible when you're evaluating the entire internet, and you'll often see, a great piece of analysis written by some think tank mixed together with a Reddit thread on the same subject, delivering you the output. And when that's the problem, you, in my view, address it with people. So what we have done, and it's very simple, but it's sort of radical, I think, in this industry, is take a group of the smartest people I know or I can find in different subject matter areas, and we focused primarily on politics, geopolitics, foreign affairs, mostly because that's the world I know. And then we've begun looking at mental health issues because that's become a huge use case, especially with teenagers asking mental health questions as well as personal finance. And then what we do is we have built benchmarks that evaluate the answers the model gives in these different areas. And then our experts will review those outputs and score them essentially on areas like accuracy. We have a whole bunch of criteria, but the source selection, the perspectives that are represented, tone when it involves things like mental health, and essentially come up with a score that then we can share with the model companies so that they can hopefully improve their outputs. A big problem we have today is that there aren't really, or they're certainly not required, to do independent evaluation. So they're all doing their own internal evaluations of their models and the answers they give, but there's no one sort of doing that in an independent way. So, for example, over the last few weeks, you had 2 of the big model companies in the context of the administration and a lot of people in Congress saying, we've got to do something about woke AI and the bias in AI. And 2 of the big companies put out reports saying, we've evaluated our systems and our models are not biased. And it's like, okay, well, so you're grading your own homework. Great. That's not sustainable. And it doesn't make sense. I mean, we don't let, banks are regulated. We don't let pharmaceutical companies approve drugs or food, safety isn't determined by the food companies. there has to be some kind of independent evaluation, and that's what we're trying to move toward. And I think there is some openness to it. We're working with a couple of the companies now who want honest and genuine feedback, and I think in the long term, this really is about not just making Congress happy or the administration happy. It's about building trust. If you want to build a business and you want consumers to trust your models or enterprise to trust your models, you do need to improve and get it better. And I think everyone who's using these tools has had their own experience with getting answers that are wildly off base, and they're not there yet, and I think they recognize it.
Before I want to get back to the concept of why grading your own homework doesn't work, but I am curious to hear from you and what you've found. Does AI bias tend to, where it exists, tend to lean one way or another ideologically on the spectrum? What have you found so far?
I think most of the research has shown that the models tend to lean left, and that's been replicated now a number of times. But it's not quite that simple. I think it's often what we have found a lot about nuance and source selection, and it's not all just right and left anymore. I mean, when we look at foreign policy, we try to evaluate the different perspectives represented in it. Think about Ukraine and Russia. You may have a pro-NATO interventionist perspective represented in an answer, but no sort of isolationist viewpoint. And that's not right-left, per se. And I think we've oversimplified it in a lot of ways, that it's not only just are they left-leaning or are they right-leaning, but are they capturing sort of the broader context that's needed to get an answer and capturing the nuance. And I think you can only do that with people who have real subject matter expertise. And that's part of the problem is, when these companies say, we're solving these problems ourselves, it's like, okay, so there's an engineer in Silicon Valley who is making a determination about whether this is a pro-NATO interventionist perspective. I would rather have Neil Ferguson and Fareed Zakaria arguing about that than having engineers in Silicon Valley make that decision. Same with, the government shutdown. When they're trying to come up with an answer that gives you the nuance of what's really going on and what people are on both sides of the aisle trying to achieve, you have engineers who are correcting those answers to get the model to a better place. Well, we have Kevin McCarthy. I'd rather hear his point of view on what's really going on. And I think if you can develop, and we've tried to build, our expert network is bipartisan. And again, in this polarized world, there's no way you're ever going to make everybody happy. But we have tried to find people across the political spectrum. We've partnered with most all of the think tanks in Washington, again, across the political spectrum, on health issues, the Cleveland Clinic, Mount Sinai, to try to bring those viewpoints in, which is just a deeper, richer, kind of information that's essentially curated for the LLMs, so that they don't have to sort of search the entire internet and find the signal in that noise. And I think that's important. We're seeing a lot of improvement in what we've done so far.
By the way, some of what you were describing to me earlier about the work that you do for those nonprofits, it's basic. It's not brain surgery here, where it's even the way that they structure their web pages, optimizing that so that these models are picking up on, like you said, the signal, separating the signal from the noise. Can you just briefly describe that work?
Yeah, for think tanks in particular, it's different from news organizations because they have a business model so they're often protecting their content from being scraped. A lot of the nonprofits, especially in the think tank world, want to get their content out there, want people to see it, and so they want to figure out how to optimize for these systems so that they identify it and use it. And part of the problem is actually structuring it and annotating the content in a way that the LLM can interpret it more accurately and give proper attribution. And so we have trained our own models to do this annotation so that it is, and then we can provide the content directly to the LLMs, but it's just easier for a large language model to read and to understand, if that makes sense. Now, there's a danger inherent in this also, and it's going to be interesting to see how this develops because the same issues that we dealt with at Meta about foreign adversaries manipulating social media platforms, they can also do this with AI. There are lots of tricks now where you can try to optimize for an LLM using your content, and there are people who are using Reddit and Wikipedia and these sources where they're able to use very specific tactics that will make the LLM be more apt to reach for that content. I'm oversimplifying, but hopefully that makes sense. And that becomes a little dangerous. When you see people trying to manipulate the LLMs, especially around sort of breaking news moments. And I think that's something we should be watching carefully. But I do think even simple things, and news publishers, I care deeply about the news business, and I would like to see them succeed. And hopefully we'll get to a point where these big model companies are paying for news, but even news publishers have to evolve and learn that we're in a new world, and you have to optimize your content differently so that it is used by these tools. Because I hate to say it, but my kids are probably never going to go to the New York Times website. I don't think they ever have, actually. This is the path forward, and I think you've got to figure out, if you care about credible information, how you end up, in partnership with these companies, because this sort of old business model that we've had for so long is going away in the next year to two, if not sooner.
Back to this concept of needing external evaluation, not grading your own homework for some of these companies. Talk to us about your learnings from your time at Meta. Obviously, social media companies were and are still, to some extent, criticized heavily for bias, misinformation, for, there have been different attempts at content moderation. Do you automate? Do you use humans? Combination. So what are some of the learnings that you're taking from your time at Meta and being in that world to what you're doing now?
A lot. So one thing I would say is social media optimizes for engagement. If you look at my Instagram, it is nothing but puppies and babies. I got so sick of politics in my Instagram feed, I just was liking everything that was a puppy and a baby, and I have the best Instagram feed now. LLMs don't work that way. They're optimizing for predictability, or as I was sort of explaining before, what they've been trained on, or what's the easiest thing for them to find. And that's a little bit different, but can have its own challenges related to that. It's still, you will, if it's not trained on a broad set of information or perspectives, it's not going to give you that. The other lesson to me is around transparency, which is, this was always, the social media companies have always been so protective of algorithms and how they make decisions around what you see in your social media feed. I think Meta has learned that lesson and gotten much more open about how the algorithms work and given you much more control over how you can change your algorithm to make it be whatever you want it to be. And I think in this new world we're in, transparency about how these LLMs operate, how they're choosing their sources, how they're being trained, on what data they're being trained on is essential. And there is a real lack of transparency. The last thing I would mention, just in terms of learnings, is trust. If you lose people's trust, it is really hard to get it back. And Meta, we went through a very challenging time when I was there around news, but a whole host of issues. And it was years of a lot of work to improve that relationship with users, but people in general. And these companies are incredibly important and incredibly powerful. And if they lose people's trust by inaccurate information or things that happen in crisis moments, and we're seeing that, where some of these, it's been awful to see these teenagers who've committed suicide because, some model has engaged them around mental health issues in a way that's inappropriate. Things are going to start happening, and I think if they don't get ahead of this and figure out how to address these issues early on and be transparent to ensure that trust, that will lead to huge problems later.
I wish we would have had more time to dive a little bit deeper into the mental health side, because that is so critical, so important. I'm glad you guys are turning your attention there as well. But thank you so much, Campbell. Thank you for all the important work that you guys are doing.
Great to be here. Thank you all.
Thank you.